Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. A fight between Charles Martin and Gerald Washington for an IBF Eliminator has been confirmed for the Deontay Wilder and Tyson Fury pay-per-view on February the 22nd. So no shock that this is going to be on the card, because this was tabbed a couple of weeks ago, and you can find that video on the channel where I did preview this potential fight on the pay-per-view card. I'll make sure that's available at the end of this one. But I think the thing that was a little surprising to me, at least, is that this Eliminator between Martin and Washington is the co-main event. So you have a world title fight below it, and they've added a fourth fight to this pay-per-view card, because remember, it was originally going to be 3, but now they've fattened it out to 4. So the other fights on the card, not heavyweight fights, but a junior featherweight world championship bout between champion Emmanuel Navarrete. He's defending his title against Heo Santacima. And then you have a super welterweight fight between Sebastian Fundora and Australian Daniel Lewis. So obviously at the top of the bill, Wilder and Fury, their rematch. So that is the pay-per-view card, the 4 fights. I'll get to Martin and Washington's quotes. There has been a press release issued, and then I will get to a few thoughts. So of this fight between Washington and himself, Martin says, "It's great to be back on the big stage. Wilder vs Fury 2 is the biggest heavyweight fight in a long time, and it's great to be on the pay-per-view. February 22 will get me one step closer to my goal of becoming a 2-time heavyweight champion. Gerald Washington is standing in my way, so it's my job to go right through him toward my ultimate goal." And then Gerald Washington, he is quoted as saying, "This title eliminator is a very big opportunity for me, and I'm going to do everything in my power to win on February 22. I have the right team behind me and the right mindset. I've known Martin my whole career, and we've even spent some time working together in the ring. I'm going to be at my best, and I expect the same from him. It's an honor to be part of an event like this. Deontay and Tyson are both characters, and I'm glad to be part of what's going to be a great night of boxing, February 22. So this is actually a pretty decent fight in terms of the competitiveness, and if you saw my previous video, I believe this is actually well matched. It's pretty much a 50-50. Martin and Washington, they're both in this fight. I think some people may favour Charles Martin though, because Gerald Washington, obviously, he's been a couple of times in his career when he sort of wilted against Jarrell Miller, for example. He retired in that fight, and also banged out in a couple of rounds by Adam Kovnarski when he went in with a very bizarre strategy to really try to mix it and trade with Kovnarski, and came off second best and knocked out in 2 rounds. But I don't think he'll be coming in too gung-ho. I think he will use his height and his reach. He's 6'6", good jab, and I think against the southpaw Charles Martin, he will fancy his chances. But I do believe this is a good fight, but co-main event good? Yeah, I'm a little surprised that it's been named the co-main event. I just assumed because Emmanuel Navarrete, the top-ranked fighter defending his world title, I figured, well, that will be the co-main, but not so. They've gone with a heavyweight fight that all it has on the line is a title eliminator in the IBF, and that's not a final eliminator to determine the next IBF mandatory, because that currently is already held. Kubrat Pulev, the IBF mandatory challenger. It's likely the winner of this fight will end up having to fight a final eliminator at some point. So you could argue, you know, there's not a whole lot on the line here, because eliminators are a dime a dozen. Just because you're in one doesn't mean you're going to be, you know, the next mandatory. Often there is a final eliminator, and sometimes there can be multiple eliminators in different sanctioning bodies. Obviously, more recently, we haven't had too many eliminators because the division has sort of stagnated, with mandatory challengers sort of sitting around and waiting. But this, overall, it's a good fight. Maybe it's not the sort of sizzle that you might want from a co-main event. Both these guys are good fighters, but they are sort of undercard fighters on general sort of television type cards. So a little surprised that this is the one that's been tabbed as the co-main event, but I guess it is what it is now. And so the card, Fury Wilder, followed by Gerald Washington and Charles Martin, that will be the leading event to the main event. Yeah, I'm a little surprised, as you can probably tell. But yeah, decent fight, and I'm sort of leaning towards Charles Martin myself. But as we saw in that fight against Robert Helenius, Gerald Washington, it was a seesaw fight there. That was back in July 2019. And Helenius was probably up, but Washington was having spots of success before landing the hammer blow on Helenius, just absolutely, knocking him into next week. And Charles Martin, he can be hit, he can be hurt. We saw that against Anthony Joshua. But in the main, he has proved to be relatively durable in his career. But if he can weather the opening few rounds, and he seems to be a bit of a slow starter, if he can get going, let his combinations go, he could probably actually have good success against Gerald Washington, who does seem to tire in the second half of the fight. So, if it goes into the second half of the fight, I certainly would be favouring Charles Martin. If he is able to apply more pressure, maybe step it up, put Washington under that mental pressure that he's cracked under before, I could see a Martin win. But if Gerald Washington is to get a victory, I would think it would be earlier rather than later, and probably through the right hand. But what do you make of this fight? I like it. Maybe it's not co-main event sort of like, but, it still is a good fight for the heavyweight division. Drop a comment, loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe. Follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.